So, hello together, and a warm welcome to our discussion regarding securing the connected truck. My name is Daniel. I'm partner of Roland Berger Strategy Consultants, and I'm responsible there for digital and automotive. And I have the great pleasure to be the moderator during that panel discussion. And as you all know, connected trucks, they have many benefits. So it's no surprise that they've become commonplace in Europe's roads and everybody's talking about it. However, the fast amount of data created by these vehicles increases and the potential for attacks is rising as well. So therefore, manufacturers must implement more robust and advanced cybersecurity measures to protect their fleets, and many other things have to be considered. That's why it's a great pleasure being here today, a discussion with the participants in the panel about that. And well, before we're going to start with the first questions, I would like to ask the participants to introduce themselves, that you get to know them a little better, and that you're also knowing why I'm more than happy that they are a part of the discussion today. And maybe Ellen, do you like to start? And then we go Ellen, John, and Vit. So we have a good introduction part.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation today. So my name's Alan Platt. I'm CEO and co-founder of CyberHive. And before founding CyberHive, I had actually got 15 years experience in safety critical systems, robotics, autonomous vehicles and related industries. But CyberHive, which is my company, is a cybersecurity technology company co-founded by myself and my business partner, David Blundell. David's really the technical brains behind what we do, but we've been around now for almost 6 years. But David's experience in networking, cloud and cybersecurity goes back decades. We have a slightly different approach. We recognise that traditional security approaches have their limitations, so we're trying to do things a little bit differently. And initially for us, our core business started with governments, government customers hosting very sensitive data in the cloud, and accessing the data though was a huge problem for them. And there's this kind of perceived tension between security and usability for those customers. But surely for something to be secure, it's inherently complicated to use, isn't it? Well, actually, we believe exactly the opposite is true. So if something's hard to set up and use, people make mistakes, accidentally leave the doors open for attackers, and even worse, if a system's too hard to use, it gets bypassed altogether, leaving security wide open. So we developed a mesh software-defined networking technology to solve this problem. It's not only much more secure than conventional VPNs and connectivity, it's also much easier to administer, easier to deploy, and just works far better. And because we use what's called a zero trust approach, we can prevent not only unauthorized users from intercepting your data, but we can even prevent malware spread between devices on the network. And as I said, we built this for government use cases. So why am I here on talking about trucks? Well, actually, the design of the tech makes it perfect for IoT solutions and connected vehicles. We're even able to run it over satellite links with no degradation in performance. And we've been involved in several cutting edge trials with automotive and transport customers, including testing vehicle to vehicle comms for truck platooning, as well as vehicle to roadside infrastructure comms. And I'm pleased to say it just works. Even when we're connecting to badly vandalized kit with all of the aerials snaps off so that 90% of the data was lost. So I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the discussions today.
Thank you. John, tell us more about you.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks. Happy to be here. My name is John Maag. I work at Cummins in a central product cybersecurity team. Our team supports our various business units worldwide in their various industries, providing processes, ways of working, adherence to standards like ISO 21434. Obviously, we operate in the automotive space, commercial vehicles, passenger car, but we also work in industrial controls, providing generators, primary backup powers, alternative energies like green hydrogen production. My day-to-day is generally advising the design teams, the technical teams throughout kind of the automotive V lifecycle, really focusing on the automotive side. Kind of from the beginning of development, working with interface agreements with suppliers and customers, through initial designs, threat assessments, technical specifications, all the way through test plans for verification, validation, and handing off to our continual support team for continuous monitoring. Prior to Cummins, I worked at Volvo Group North America in a systems engineering team where I was the North American technical point of contact for product cyber. I have a bachelor's in electrical and computer engineering where I minored in cyber and did some heavy vehicle security research.
Welcome. So Vic, more than nosy to hear, who are you?
Hello. So my name is Šembera. I'm a researcher at Trend Micro, and recently also at VicOne, which is a subsidiary of Trend Micro, focusing on automotive solutions. I am located in Prague, Czech Republic, and previously I've been working as a Unix cybersecurity consultant, then working as an IoT researcher, cybersecurity focusing, and last 5 years I'm working in the automotive cybersecurity area. And mostly I'm doing reverse engineering of firmware of different ECUs and also the buses and communication devices and such things.
Wonderful. I guess it's already obvious why you're the right group to discuss the topic, and I'm really looking forward to learn more about it. So maybe start with a little bit of icebreaker question, the first one to start the whole discussion, and I think that it's also something where you are very capable in. And that is, what are the main types of connected truck cyber attacks, and how is the threat landscape evolving? So what can we expect out there? What are the new, let's say, trends? Yeah, what do we have to face there?
The cyber attacks on trucks, in my opinion, they don't differ significantly from attacks on the passenger cars. Both wars share the same technologies and very similar architectures, with very minor differences. So we can expect similar types of attacks in both worlds. What does differ, of course, is the value of assets which are at risk, whether they are tangible or intangible. And attackers are primarily interested in profit. So it's very important in the cybersecurity area for trucks. It's very important topic. Let's be honest, the idea that someone could take control of your car while you're sitting in it and drive it into a ditch, as was demonstrated by Chris Walasek and Charlie Miller on YouTube, is terrifying, but such scenario is highly unlikely. The attacker wants to gain a real profit. So let's talk more about the vehicle thefts or cargo thefts, as well as the theft of the data and subsequent extortion or sale of it, as these are much more likely scenarios. And in the case of trucks, the impact is significantly greater. I have not found documented cases of successful cyber attacks on trucks yet, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist. They simply haven't been proven yet. And in contrast, with personal vehicles, this year there has been a first case where the attackers successfully break into the internal buses of the car, and they disabled immobilizer, opened the door, and stolen the car without the keys. And this is the case which, of course, can happen with the truck, very in the same manner. In the past, there were not much sophisticated attacks like jamming of the keys or replying of the keys protocols, or relay attacks in the keyless access cars. But now we are really facing the real cyber attack on the internals of the car and misusing of the weaknesses which are in the design of the car. So this is kind of a turning point where the theoretical methods of attacking vehicles described in the research fair are now shifted to the situation where the proven criminal elements are exploiting weaknesses in vehicle design. And there are even ready-made tools available which such criminals can buy, and such as modified portable player, which has a built-in microcontroller inside, and when you connect it to the canvas of the specific vehicle, you can send messages, deactivate the mobilizer, the user is authenticated, open the door and start the engine, and you are done. So this probably happened with a specific model of the cars in the US this year, as was it was proven and recorded on the security camera of the owner of the car. And there were also there were approved signs of trying stealing the similar models of the same car in other cases.
Can I just add
so, yeah.
So I was just going to add a little bit to that as well, because obviously stealing the vehicles is part of the problem. There's dozens of different ways that you've just described of doing that, including, but actually what we've noticed in outside the automotive world, most attackers are no longer kind of going head on against the defenses that people expect them to try to attack. So the example there is the manufacturers will get increasingly better at designing more and more secure keys to get into vehicles. So eventually those methods will be locked down. But of course, that's not the only way in. So you just described one where you can use a CAN bus device plugged into a vehicle to effectively bypass the controls from inside the vehicle. But there's lots of other connectivity that's starting to emerge in vehicles, connected entertainment and infotainment systems. The concept of software-defined vehicles is becoming increasingly common, particularly in automotive, but that's starting to make its way into other worlds as well. And they often have the ability to do things like over-the-air updates. And both of those require internet connectivity. Now, okay, you could argue that that's only internet connectivity to the entertainment system in the vehicle. But actually, if you've got connectivity to the entertainment system, you've potentially got a route through into other systems in the car. So
yeah, exactly.
you basically bypass the secure systems like the locking systems and attack a relatively insecure one like the entertainment system and use that as a route in. So the more systems and the more complexity and the more functionality we build into vehicles, the bigger the attack surface and the more vulnerability we're building into the same vehicles.
Yeah. Speaking of attack surface, if I can jump in here, I think a lot of people, when they think about the threat landscape, they're considering what the attacker is capable of doing. So they're thinking about how the attacker is continually getting smarter, learning new things. What I'm concerned about is maybe how the industry itself can change over time. So, you know, when you are designing a vehicle, certain assumptions go into that design. The interfaces in and out of that vehicle are assumed at the design phase. Over time, those assumptions may change. For example, here in North America, there was the ELD mandate, electronic logging device mandate, where essentially the federal government required a telematics device be installed on the truck system in order to track hours of service, basic information like engine hours, vehicle speed, such as that. Unfortunately, none of the manufacturers way back when thought about that when they were designing their vehicles.
Yeah.
But I think over time, we just need to expect the unexpected. And the threat landscape doesn't necessarily need to be the attacker changing. It can be the system we're trying to protect as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think John and Alan, you both touched already a very important thing, and which is out there, which is software-defined vehicle. So maybe dig a little bit deeper into the question of which role will it play in the truck market? So what are your experiences and views on that?
So I can't speak too closely about the truck market, but I have already starting to see things. Obviously, software-defined vehicles are already pretty prevalent in the automotive space. You know, there's an awful lot of people are basically wanting functionality and features like the ability to unlock your vehicle with one of these, a mobile phone. You know, it's happening in the automotive market. The ability to actually set up your vehicle for any driver before you get into it. The ability to monitor charging. All of these kind of things require external connectivity. But actually, software-defined vehicles is kind of the next step in that road. So in software-defined vehicles in in automotive. I think there's a big example recently around BMW were allegedly going to switch off the ability to have heated seats in your car through software unless you paid for a subscription for it. And there's a number of other things like that that are starting to make their way in. And it's really cheap for a manufacturer to build those options in, and it's a really good revenue stream. So for the manufacturing perspective, it's a great idea to have software-defined vehicles. Even things like lengthening the range of electric vehicles can be done just with the flick of a switch, or accelerating the performance of a vehicle. And these things are starting to make their way into other industries. We've seen it quite a lot already starting to make its way through into agriculture and into mining vehicles and other such things, where actually telemetry and abilities to add and remove features from agricultural vehicles is already making its way in software-defined vehicles. And of course, if you can hack that, it's a problem not only for the user, but it's also a problem for the manufacturers. They're potentially using a lot of revenue streams. Interesting as an example, actually, at the beginning of the recent war in Ukraine, where there's a bunch of diggers from a well-known digger manufacturer were appropriated, and those diggers actually have the capability to shut them down remotely. So the manufacturer thought that it wouldn't be a problem; they could just switch them all off at root cause. Unfortunately, the cybersecurity was not strong enough, and it was very quickly cracked. So those vehicles have now been successfully stolen and used elsewhere. So I think software-defined vehicles is a real thing, and it's a real problem both for the users and the manufacturers.
Thank you very much for sharing that, John.
Not too much to add there, Alan. I think you covered that well, but I will say I think software-defined vehicles are inevitable. They're coming, whether or not product cyber professionals like it. I think there's a lot of benefits to software-defined vehicles from a security perspective. The ability to patch quickly, the ability to fix vulnerabilities quickly, use third-party and open source software that has more researchers and more kind of time spent on the security of that software. At the same time, you're adding complexity. You're adding more potential vulnerabilities, more surface for attack. It's coming either way, and I think as folks who work in cybersecurity, we need to be ready for it. So.
Absolutely, and patching is a terrifying thing in cybersecurity generally. If things don't stay patched, they're not going to stay secure because people are discovering new vulnerabilities all the time. But conversely, if you can patch things, that opens up the opportunity so that you can do over-the-air updates for vehicles. And over-the-air updates by connecting to a web server opens the possibility for downloading malware onto your vehicle. And it could sit there for a long period of time. And it might just compromise your radio station that you're able to play, or it might just mean that you can no longer access your heated seats, or actually it could do something a lot more serious. And of course, this is going to get a whole lot worse when self-driving vehicles become a reality. Maybe we'll touch on that a bit later, but there's a strong commercial imperative for automotive and self-driving vehicles. For example, CyberHive was involved in a truck platooning project, where in this case the first vehicle was driven by a real person, but the intention was that a series of 5 or more autonomous vehicles would follow in close convoy, and that saves on driver costs. It also saves on fuel, because of the slipstreaming you're able to do, and it's actually arguably considerably safer. Problem is that to reliably do that, you need to be able to do vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure comms. It's got to be secure. And imagine how bad it would be if an autonomous and self-driving vehicle was taken over by a hacker. That could be unthinkable.
Yeah, absolutely right. And maybe, Alan, if you'd like to elaborate on that a little more direction, what are now the implications of the cybersecurity threat faced by the connected trucks? So which implications do you see? What are the main things to focus on that?
So there are many implications. The problem is that an awful lot of people think, actually, okay, I've got a connected vehicle, so what? So often people think the implications are not very large, because quite often a lot of connectivity at the moment is realistically used most of the time for telemetry and sending data back to head office, or for monitoring vehicles, and as I said, or for entertainment systems. So you could look at that and think, actually, is that a particularly big thing? Do I really care if somebody knows where I am? Do I really care if somebody's intercepted that data? And the answer is probably not. The problem is that by enabling the connectivity and also the software-defined vehicles and enabling the over-the-air updates, you give people the ability to then inject malware actually into the vehicles. And most vehicles these days actually use software extensively in the vehicle, so you could compromise the security. Even in current vehicles, systems like the engine management system and even ABS systems and things like that are often controlled via software. So if you can connect to the vehicle at all, even for a very benign purpose, the implications can be quite serious for safety even today.
Yeah, and another point is when we see the shift from the traditional distributed ECU system, when you have over 100 of ECUs in the vehicle, to the centralized system, which is software-defined vehicles. Everything has been running software recently. That's the fact of this last 15 or 20 years. But this software has been running on the specialized microcontrollers, and there was about tens of different manufacturers and architectures of those CPUs and different developers of the firmware inside of those ECUs. And now we are moving to the software-defined vehicles where you can expect virtualization and open source software and standardized solutions. And in this at the same time, you are getting a lot of people which knows those technologies, which is a difference from the past. So you can expect that more and more potential attackers will know the technology and will try to know their knowledge. So this is the risk.
Is there any regional difference or specifica that you're seeing?
I'm sorry?
I was asking if you see any regional specificas. So is it in Asia different than in the US? Is it in Europe something different? Or is it, let's say, overall?
I don't think so. I see the shift to the software-defined vehicles in all regions. And I think it's the same, not really different.
Of course, there may be legislative differences coming up, but does that actually change the underlying technology and the underlying problems? Probably not.
Yeah. Those standards like ISO SAE 21434 and WP29 are very good push of the industry to the right direction, but I'm afraid that adoption is really slow, and we are still behind of the technological development in this area. But that's a good thing.
As far as regions go, anymore, the large majority of electronic architectures are built for a global market. I mean, OEMs spend a lot of time designing one architecture that can be sold in many regions. So the regulations in UNECE and European countries, I think that's only going to help other regions. I think adoption rates, like Vit and Alan, you're saying, it may come quicker where there are the regulations, but I think overall the regulations are helping globally, in my opinion.
It's interesting as well because regulations actually are sometimes a bit of a double-edged sword. So obviously automotive is a fairly heavily regulated industry. Actually, my background, I come originally from the chemical industry and then from the robotics industries, and there's lots of regulations in those areas. And the regulations can be great for driving the right behaviors and making sure that things that are released are safe and secure, but they can also restrict the use of modern security practices. So there are various best practices that are in use in pharmaceutical industry, for example, around GMP, good manufacturing practice, and similar other regulations. But actually, they sometimes prevent you from doing the right thing because you have to do things the way that was secure at the time when that standard was written. And sometimes keeping standards up to date with the reality of the ever-evolving cybersecurity landscape can be a problem. And this is something where actually I think the automotive industry actually is, in terms of adoption of new technologies, is not one of the quickest industries.
I can't say I disagree with you, Alan, but I will say that I think in terms of the UNECE regulation in 21434, they did do a good job of trying to keep out the required technical implementations. It's much more so a kind of a process-driven, organizational-driven types of requirements, not those technical you shall use, AES 128, which may be out of date in 5 years. So.
Yeah. And those organizational changes are usually those which are slowing things down because it's very complex to change the organization inside.
That is absolutely true. Yeah, that is an absolutely true point. So cheers for the perspective on that. Yeah. And maybe, I know, John, it's maybe a question that fits pretty good to you. So what can the truck manufacturers do to protect their vehicles from increasingly dynamic and sophisticated cyber attacks? So what was their position? What do you recommend? What is the way forward?
Yeah, so that's a tough question. There's definitely no easy solution there. There's no one technical gotcha. You can't buy one solution, bolt it on at the end of development, and be in the clear for the rest of that vehicle's life cycle. I like to think of it as a bit of a cat and mouse game, where the threats are mice. They will always be coming in, and the OEM's job is to try and catch every threat as best as they can and recover from those threats when they turn into a confirmed vulnerability. I think the good news, as we've been touching on already, is the standardization and the regulation. Yes, I think it's a slow adoption rate, and there's still a lot of work to go. But I think the process of considering product cyber throughout the life cycle, that will catch the fundamentals. I mean, we will be disabling interfaces that aren't used, authenticating the communication outside of the vehicle. We'll be doing the basic things that could be missed if there weren't those systematic checks. Besides that, I think it really is a culture shift and a training perspective for the OEMs, for the suppliers. One central product cyber team is not going to be able to solve all of the problems. Things are going to slip through the cracks. So I think it's really important that everyone that's working on the development, design, implementation of the systems going in the vehicle at least has some tangential understanding of what product cyber is, kind of has it in their back of the mind to consider it as they're going about their work. The other thing I would say is that you do need those really talented folks, and there's always going to be a shortage of those talented folks. I would tell OEMs and suppliers not to lean away from working with those third parties, working from kind of those technical experts. From an OEM perspective, that may be a tier one. It may be also kind of the niche companies that are specializing in a specific cyber technology that's kind of all they do all day long. OEMs don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are experts that are willing to come in and come help. So
yeah, and when we are talking about the adoption of the changes necessary for increasing cybersecurity of vehicles, there are also the technological obstacles. Like we are still using CAN bus technology, which we need to shift into at least CAN SD to use authentication of the messages inside of the vehicle. And it will take years. And in between, we have a lot of vehicles in the field which are used many years, and it will take another years when they will be replaced for a new modern architecture vehicles. So this is the problem.
That's a very good point as well. But so there's a couple of points I'd just like to build on that. First of all, in my opinion, one of the first things to do with cybersecurity is stop the attackers getting in the first place. So securing connectivity to connected vehicles is really important, and the current solutions that are out there could be better. But I think there's also an opportunity here to take a leaf from best practice in the corporate world. So connectivity is absolutely rife in every single organization, and it's absolutely essential to secure all of that connectivity. So we could be doing exactly the same in vehicles. So not only securing the perimeter security, effectively reducing the attack surface and stopping attackers getting in, but also if you start with the assumption that they have already got in somewhere. So imagine you have a compromised infotainment system. A good cybersecurity platform should be possible to prevent malware or prevent attacks basically from spreading within the system. It's a concept called zero trust networking within corporate organizations, and actually we built that into our IoT product because we feel it's absolutely the best way to go. You have to assume that devices in your network have been compromised and then stop it from cross-infecting more critical systems. But I agree with your point that actually it's challenging to do on something like CAN bus. So actually if there are weaknesses in those systems, systems, then maybe actually looking at updating the system's root and branch long term might be the thing to do. But as the starting point, I'd strongly recommend stop the attackers getting in the first place.
Yeah, so wonderful. Before we start with the next question or taking a look to the next the details, I also like to motivate the audience to ask the questions in the Q&A section, because I already had a look into it and it's still empty. So feel absolutely free. We have enough time in the next half an hour also to use the live questions. So we'd like to motivate you to write in the chat, what you'd like to know, what else we should discuss. I always have an eye on it, and we'll bring your questions into the discussion. So I guess, John, you were already saying a very important and big work, and that is culture. Yeah. Maybe we also try to reflect, besides technology aspects, a little bit more. What does organizations have to do in a sense of how do they have to organize themselves? Which capabilities do they need? What do they have to do to be attractive for talent on that? Because when I take a look to my consultancy life, these are the questions which are coming up quite often. So they are aware that there is something, but they don't know how to do it and where to get the people and which profiles. So maybe we do a step out of the technological discussion. We come back later on and also try to reflect a little bit more how the organizations have to structure themselves to have the right view on security, and to have the right organizational format into that, and how to stay attractive for the talent which is out there in the market.
Yeah, I think obviously talent attraction is a difficult question, and it's something that I think every company wants to exceed in, being able to get the experts that are actually able to implement the solutions they need. I think a lot of it comes down to what the opportunities are within that company, what they are designing. A lot of those experts want to be on the cutting edge, making new solutions, implementing new solutions that are going to work far into the future. So I think, for one thing, companies should be focused on developing what's new and giving experts opportunities to work on that new technology.
Yeah, and I think that within the organization, the cybersecurity awareness or spirit is really crucial. It's very important, and it's not usual yet in the organization as a whole, for the tier 1, tier 2, or OEMs even. So I think this is thing that it's important to be adapted.
It's really, from my experience, it's really challenging to find and retain really good quality cybersecurity professionals. It's a challenging thing to do, but actually I think that's, even if you can manage to find and retain the right people, I think there's actually a bigger thing that's needed in some organizations, and that's a cultural shift. As I mentioned earlier on, I think sometimes cybersecurity is seen as the enemy of productivity, or something that makes functionality worse, or is often just thought about as a bolt-on that's put on at the end. So you design something that works and then you work out how to secure it. I think that actually we need to be starting to getting organizations to think about how to build it in at the design stage. So digital security by design, which is a concept that the UK government is pushing very heavily, is well worth thinking about. And also, I think a good cybersecurity solution, actually, if it's implemented properly as a platform, can actually help people to do things. Because, for example, if you can establish secure communications in a known secure platform between devices, the engineers don't need to spend time reinventing the wheel in terms of how to establish the comms in the first place. So I think a cultural shift to thinking differently as cybersecurity as being at the root of what you do instead of being a bolt-on extra.
And what is, from your experience, the reason why so many companies are struggling with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting challenge. I think we come from a historical place where basically cybersecurity was a bolt-on extra. I mean, the starting point for cybersecurity, bear in mind, is that viruses started infecting computers, and so the solution was to put in place a defense against that, antivirus software. And then of course the viruses get more complicated, and the attacks get more complicated, phishing starts, and we end up with human error causing problems. And it's continuously been a game of whack-a-mole with the attackers. The attackers thinking of increasingly complicated and sophisticated ways to defend, to attack you, with you continuously putting increasingly complicated and often increasingly unworkable cybersecurity solutions in place to prevent them. Whereas, as I said, I'm a strong believer that actually if you develop a system, if you basically take several steps back and think differently, instead of trying to bolt cybersecurity onto the product after you've finished, build it in at the ground level. Make sure that the digital security by design project that I mentioned is an example actually of a project that's it's co-funded by ARM and the National Cybersecurity Centre, and this is actually developing a completely new type of processor technology called Cherry. It's being developed at the moment for ARM and RISC processors, and it provides hardware level security that eliminates entire classes of zero-day vulnerabilities. It makes it much harder to compromise your software, and that's the kind of thing that actually I think if that was adopted across the industry once the technology is available, it'd make it much harder for attackers to get in there in the first place. It's protecting it at the root level, at the silicon level, before you even give the attackers the chance to exploit vulnerabilities.
Interesting point of view, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. We were also touching the point of partnering, so using the experts which are out there. So, well, from my experience, it's quite difficult sometimes to integrate them properly, especially when you are more a corporate setup on that. So what is your recommendation on that? What works good? What works fine? Where do you see, let's say, the biggest chances, the biggest risks, what to consider when to work with the external parties on that?
So again, I can pick up on this from the corporate perspective, but I'd be more than happy for Vit or John to answer one or two of these as well. But this particular one actually is an area that's quite interesting because supply chain attacks are a common problem actually, and that's one of the areas where over-the-air updates really concern me. Working with third parties can be a problem. There've been examples actually. There was a US government department was compromised by a supply chain attack. Although their cyber defenses were pretty strong, they were using third-party software on some of their services, and actually updating that third-party software brought in malware. So actually, I think we can't just think about cybersecurity as something that my company has to deal with. Cybersecurity has to be something that you have to look at across the entire supply chain, particularly where IT and technology is concerned.
So I think from my perspective, the hardest challenge with working with third parties, it's not necessarily once you're already working with them. Once you're already working with them, once you're already employing their solution, using their expertise for penetration testing, for architectural design, those are all good things from an OEM, from a tier one, from the perspective of the company. The difficult part is actually getting into that agreement, getting buy-in from leadership, making sure trying to determine what the correct path is to go down. I think that's a big challenge. And at the end of the day, I think as cyber professionals, you just have to start asking around, evaluating the solutions that are available, and kind of coming up with a good argument to go back to leadership, to go back to the parts of your company and say, hey, this solution really can lead us where we want to go. And at the end of the day, it's a bit of a sales pitch that you have to convince that any given technology will significantly improve your current product.
And do you know what that means, or can you give us some more insight what it also means, for example, for your IT stack? When you like to work way more with partners and have to be way more flexible. Do you have experiences in that?
Go ahead, Vit. I was going to say I just think it's very similar. I don't work directly with IT, but I think the same sorts of evaluations, the same sorts of discussions need to happen.
Good, wonderful.
It's so just one other thing to add there as well. I think it's very easy as well to outsource your cybersecurity to somebody else who's going to validate your code and check that there's no problems in it and bolt on security afterwards. And again, I think that's something that we should avoid doing as an industry as a whole, because actually, if we're that's back to the idea of just bolting on security at the end. And if you're asking a third party to do it, they're not the people who are going to suffer from it if there actually are any problems. So I think, cybersecurity needs to be something that is considered right at the design stage of every product.
Yeah, and if something happens, you have just the contract with your supplier, but you are in troubles yourself. Yeah, and mitigating the problem will take weeks, months, maybe years. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's the problem.
A good example of that is that actually there's a recent cyber incident that happened here in the UK, which ended up compromising and losing quite a lot of data for a number of large companies, including British Airways and a number of other companies lost quite a lot of data. It was mostly pension and payroll data, I believe. And the reason that was compromised is because their pension and payroll provider software was compromised. The reason that was compromised is because the solution provider who provided the secure file sharing software was compromised. So essentially it went all the way back in the supply chain. And of course, the supplier of the secure file sharing solution, yeah, their software was actually the weak point, but they're not the people who actually suffer the biggest losses. It's actually the companies who are on the end of it who actually have the problem. So it's difficult to think, to express more seriously how seriously we need to take cybersecurity and need to design it in and take responsibility for it.
Yeah, understand the point. Thank you for the explanation. So coming back to the Q&A section, because I still see that there is not so much coming in. So again, I'd like to motivate everybody who's having an answer. The first one is coming in. Okay, thanks for that. So the question that we're having now in the chat before I go on with the other ones that I'm having is it possible to establish a protocol in which the system shuts off specific subsystems if a vehicle does not establish an over-the-air connection over a defined, let me take a look, I have to open it, over a defined period of time? Could this be considered as a strategy to protect a company against potential attacks? Thank you, Ellie.
Is it possible? Absolutely. Is it possible with existing vehicle architectures? It depends. So, I'm not sure I know enough about all of the details of the architectures of every single vehicle to comment on that, but it's something that we do all the time in the corporate world. Basically, if you detect that something, we actually run a known system called allow listing, and actually, if we don't establish a known good connection to the outside world, effectively we can chop off any data access to the critical systems behind the scene and prevent any data leakage. So absolutely, it can definitely be done. But in this industry, is it being done? I don't think so.
Yeah, and today we can see that the internal network infrastructure is split into segments, which are connected to a gateway, which can play a role for firewall as well. So you can today split the segments, but I don't think so that today is any car able to disable on the external request some functionality or segment of the network or part of the vehicle, because simply most of those subsystems are very important and for safety of the vehicle. You cannot simply shut it down.
I think from my perspective, there's a number of challenges with solutions such as this. I think, this constant connection to phone home is a solution we've seen in many different industries, not automotive, but that's kind of how enterprise security works. Root of trust up in the clouds that you can always contact and get up-to-date information on. That's a real challenge for some of the use cases that are faced in automotive, especially for off-highway applications, but also for some regions of the world, especially the Western United States, where constant connection is not always available. You're going over pretty rural areas where cellular connection is spotty at best. You're working in mining applications where there's no connectivity at all. You're working, in northern Canada where, you've flown in equipment. There's no connection to the back office there. So while I think this constant connection, that's definitely a way to work in the future. That's something to look into. There's a lot of challenges with it as well that would need to be worked out.
Yeah, thanks. So you see, asking questions, it's worth it. There are always coming good answers in that, and you also give us a good discussion. Yeah. So maybe go a little bit on. So by experience, normally the one who's attacking is always a little bit more innovative than the one who's attacked. So how can truck manufacturers ensure that they stay ahead of the cyber threats? So how can they stay to the edge? What's going out there?
Yeah, so I think I've already touched on this, and Alan and Vit have as well, about the long life cycle of vehicles.
Yeah.
A technical solution is designed maybe in production for the next 10 years after it's designed, and then it's on the road for another 10 years after that. So you're looking at 20 full years where one technical solution needs to be protect the vehicle for the next 2 decades. What's really important, I think, from the OEM's perspective is continuously monitoring that asset, gathering that threat intelligence of what's going on. And I think, as Alan touched on earlier, having the ability to correct vulnerabilities when they are identified, that the over-the-air updates, the patching, I think is really critical. From the perspective of trying to stay ahead of the attackers.
That kind of 10, 20-year lifespan of vehicles as well actually brings in another problem as well. So I'm sure many people have seen in the news about quantum computers starting to become a thing. And, so what? How relevant is that to this industry? And the answer is today, not very. But in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time, when quantum computers start to become a bit more of a reality and a bit more readily available, that brings with it a problem. Because most of the communications, and actually most of even the secure systems that are used within vehicles today, use a type of cryptography called RSA 2048. It's the gold standard, and for good reason, because it takes about 14 billion years to crack with a conventional computer. With a quantum computer, you can crack it in 40 minutes. So fast forward 10 years, and we might have a problem. And it's not just in this industry. That's potentially a problem that's queuing up for a very large number of very serious industries.
Yeah, quantum computing, that's a great example. It's certainly not the only example. So there are things that aren't even on the radar that may be concerned a decade down. And I think, to build off Alan's point earlier, protecting just that one interface, that connected interface, that's important. But you need to assume that that's compromised. So what kind of defense in depth strategies can you employ? What multiple layers of defense can you deploy that hopefully, when something industry changing like quantum computing does become mainstream, you still have protections there?
Yeah, it's good that you're saying that, because Shelley was asking a question in the same direction for quantum computing. So maybe you've seen it, or you just had a good dose. Yeah, that is a point of interest. But there is also one, let's say, additional question that I'd like to mention. It is, if so, how is there anything that manufacturers can do now? Because I believe, as you, that is a big risk that's gonna come up, but how to prepare?
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you now that quantum computing, so it's a good example, because actually this is something the government is worried about. And actually, it's not just something that's a future problem for the government. So if you're transferring really secure data around the internet, there's a concern at the moment that a lot of that data is just being recorded and stuffed in a data somewhere, so that a data center somewhere, so that it can be decrypted in 5, 10, 15 years time when quantum computers are available. So at the moment, that means that really sensitive data is not transferred over the open internet. Well, it can be, because there are technologies available, and actually ours is one of them. So our network connectivity solution is quantum safe, so it's secure against quantum computers today. So can you do something about that now? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just drop me an email.
So
this is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing that the manufacturer needs to take into consideration, that the very long life cycle of the product means that every algorithm can get compromised, and try to implement solutions which are maybe overshoot in those days, but in 10, 20 years will be still fine and resilient. Yeah. Because, for example, when I take an IVI system from the car, which are still used on the roads today, and they are using password file and technology from Unix systems, which are 30 years old today. Yeah. And you can crack those passwords within 14 days with the usual graphic cards, which I have proved last year. So
Yeah,
this is an example. Yeah, what you need to consider for the future.
John's point as well then actually is think about defense in depth as well. So you have to assume that something in your system has already been compromised. And it's not just about cryptography and other things that can be cracked. By the way, we use layered cryptography, so even if you crack one level, you've still got another level to get through. But yeah, it's, you know, if you make sure that actually if somehow somebody does manage to compromise a part of the system, it's prevent the lateral spread. How do you stop that from compromising another part and compromising another part? And that's one of the things that at the moment, once you're in a vehicle, you've pretty much got free reign. So.
And I would not say that manufacturers are behind attackers in the terms of knowledge and experience. I would say that they are limited in some areas, which is technology abilities, and also they need to extensively testing everything. Yeah, you cannot afford failing of the car on the road. Yeah, so. This is also the problem why manufacturers are still using proof solutions and not doing so much innovations.
Yeah, and
if not possible. Yeah.
That great point, and I would add to that at some point, you know, you're essentially asking the OEMs, the manufacturers, to protect against the unknowable, and that's a very tricky ask. So I think. From an industry perspective, we can only hope to solve this by continuously working together. You know, it's not a problem that we need to compete on. There are plenty of organizations like the Automotive ISAC where various companies should be working together, sharing information, trying to keep the entire industry ahead of the curve, so that we don't run into these issues down the line that we know are coming, but are unknown categorically.
good. So we are running in the last 8 minutes. So if there are additional questions, it's now a very good and maybe the last moment. So feel free. Discussion on that. So I'd like to add another question that we already pre-discussed a little bit to share that as well with the audience, and that is retrofit. Yeah, is there any opportunity that vehicles can be retrofitted for cybersecurity? What are your thoughts on that? Have you already seen something in the market, or do you think this is doable?
Yeah, for sure. You can retrofit a lot of things in the vehicle. Problem is that basically each model, even within the same OEM manufacturer, is different. They are using different units. And it's very difficult to create a retrofit solution which will fit all the models and even models from different manufacturers. So that's the problem. You need to create solution for a specific model, a specific manufacturer.
There are also some things that can be done again around the connectivity. So an example that we came across, not in this industry, but actually in the medical industry, was imagine there's quite a lot of hospitals out there, for example, with CAT scanners, which are multi-million-pound bits of equipment. And some of those CAT scanners are really quite old. So the technology that they're using, they're quite often running on PCs, for example, that are still running Windows XP, which is just inherently insecure these days. So how do you secure that? You can't upgrade the PC because the software won't run on a more modern operating system. And actually, that's where what you can do is you can just basically effectively firewall the connectivity. So you basically install a little module just before the Windows PC, effectively a firewall, a little appliance that basically means that the CAT scanner communicates with the module, and the module then communicates with the outside world. And you can do the same with vehicles. Essentially, if the vehicle's connectivity isn't necessarily secure, isn't as secure as you want it to be, you can basically connect the vehicle to something that is secure and use that to connect to the rest of the world. So there are certain bits of retrofit that can be done. It's not possible in all cases, but there's probably quite a wide number that are. We're doing that already, by the way, on certain vehicles in mining and agriculture, because it's a well-known problem. Particularly actually where those vehicles are used to communicating over satellite links, and satellite links are actually a little bit challenging to secure.
Wonderful. So we are running the last 5 minutes, and there are no additional questions from the audience. So I'd like to, let's say, ask one last one, which is also a little bit futuristic, let me say it like that. And that is, Alan, you were already mentioning the communication with infrastructure when vehicles can be autonomous. So that means that you are way more acting in an ecosystem, so your dependency is way higher. Yeah. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit on that. How could that future look like? What does it also mean from a cybersecurity perspective? What is changing? Yeah, if we are getting even more into that kind of a scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, what does that future look like? A little terrifying if we get it wrong. So one of the challenges with vehicles is that they're inherently moving. So the connectivity isn't stable for very long. You might need to, connect to a roadside gantry as you're driving underneath it. And the truck platooning example I gave, basically, that really comes to life when autonomous vehicles can communicate not only to the cloud, but also can communicate between themselves, so that you can communicate vehicle to vehicle. And that way, you know that when the vehicle in front is braking, the one behind can also brake. And basically, you can make the two effectively travel in much closer convoy with far greater degrees of safety. Also, vehicle to roadside infrastructure communication can be useful, because then you can anticipate upcoming road conditions. So a lot of these things kind of are coming in the future, but it brings with it a really big challenge, because actually the ability to communicate and getting the security of the communication, it's got to come hand in hand with performance. So you can't wait 2 minutes to establish a secure connection to the internet. You've got to be able to make and break connections in milliseconds, not tens of seconds. And that's a challenge. It is a solvable problem, but that's kind of the stuff that vehicle manufacturers are going to have to think about when the future is coming, because sooner or later it's the global Internet of Things. Everything's connected to everything.
To me, when I hear those future technologies, kind of the ADAS, autonomy, what screams in my mind is safety. And I think from that perspective, we can lean on some of the fundamentals of functional safety for automotive, 26262, making sure we have that redundancy, assuming things are already compromised, and making sure we have those safe fail-safes. Again, it's going to be so much more complex, and I think the fundamentals of cyber and everything we've talked about for this past hour still apply, but the safety is just getting much more important in my mind.
Yeah. And my opinion is that those assistance systems and the autonomous driving systems are on the top of it are there for increasing the safety of the passengers, because they will potentially do less mistake while driving than the human do. But we are increasing also the attack surface. So this is important from the cybersecurity point of view. Simply increasing all those assistant subsystems are increasing risk of that they can be hacked and misused.
Good. So last round for questions. I think nothing new comes up. So before the kind of close the round, any additional remarks from the group? Any last thing that you'd like to mention and give to the audience as a last thought that you'd like to share with them before I gotta say thank you and wish you all hopefully soon a wonderful weekend?
I just have one final comment, is actually we've probably been painting a slightly bleak picture of the world of cybersecurity and the fact that everything is potentially vulnerable, potentially compromised. But we've got to remember that connectivity opens up a whole world of opportunities and possibilities, and it's perfectly possible to secure it. So I think actually, provided we think about it the right way, actually the future is looking really positive in my opinion. So it's not all about the doom and gloom.
Ending on a positive note. I like it. Good discussion. Yeah. Thank you all for the time.
Yeah. So I also like to say thank you. I guess it's been obvious that you're really experts in that and you really added a lot of value. I see it like you, so there's a lot of potential in the future and security is the foundation for growth. Yeah. So it is great. I also liked a lot that we discussed so much about the transformation behind, because that is also from a cultural perspective a big step forward that we all have to do. So I think there have been many, many wonderful insights today, where we all could learn something and understand the whole topic way better. So thank you so much for all your insights. It was a great pleasure preparing it with you and doing with you the panel discussion. And I'm more than happy that I now have more contacts in my professional life. I can ask if these questions gonna come up. So thanks also from my side. And I wish you a wonderful weekend as soon as you are ready for weekend.
Yeah. Have a nice weekend all.
Thank you. Bye to the participants as well.